So this video segment is on a spending cap. First thing is I'd like to show you this graph right here because I think it's very helpful to understand what's going on. So the orange line on this graph represents the actual state spending for the last 30 years. As you can see, there was a huge jump in spending between fiscal year 2006 and 2014. Now the dark blue line on top represents the current spending limit that we actually have in the Constitution right now, and it is calculated by multiplying the base year amount of $2.5 billion, which I think we passed in the mid-80s, by the total percentage change in population plus the change in the Anchorage Consumer Price Index, CPI, which is what we call inflation. So what does that mean? So that means if there is a 5% change each in both population and CPI, that results in a 10% change allowed in the spending cap, and that is a much, much, much too high growth rate. We didn't have enough money in the early years to spend to the cap because oil revenues are independent of population and inflation. But then, of course, you can see during the boom years of 2006 through 14, we jumped our spending drastically because oil revenues increased drastically. So the green line is what our spending cap would have been if we just took 50% each of the growth rate of population and inflation. It's much more realistic to our revenues and is similar to how other states calculate their own spending caps. So the question is what are the opportunity costs of not having a realistic spending cap in place? Well, between 2006 and 2018, we would have had a much smaller budget, and therefore we would have taken a much smaller draw from the CBR during those years. And we calculated we'd probably have about $15 billion more in the CBR had we had a realistic spending cap in place during those years. The bottom line is we need a cap to force ourselves to keep our spending in check. The issues that we're grappling with now is what is included in the spending cap and how do you calculate it? And I gave one suggestion with a 50% growth in inflation and population. And then lastly, what is the base starting point? Should we start it at 4.1 billion, 4.5 billion, 5 billion? Do we include UGF, which is undesignated general funds, designated general funds, and other state funds? What do we include in it? The second bottom line for this slide is that if we do set a cap, we shouldn't be wed to it for the next 40 years. We should actually look at it periodically and make sure that it is still working for us and that our economy and growth rate makes sense based on the factors that, based on our revenue and our expense.